Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Welcome again to Freedom International Livestream, where podcasters from around the world come together to bring you important messages through special guests. And today with me are Roy from Ireland and living in Poland right now, of Awakening Podcast. And I have Steve Fierro with his Awakened Mind from Asia, and Chris Ryan of Mind Wars from Ireland, living in London. And yours truly, I am from the Philippines, but I am right here in New Jersey. And our special guest today is Donald Jeffries. And the title there is just one of his many books. He is a prolific writer. So thank you and welcome, Don.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's nice to talk to people from all over the world.
Yeah, and Don, as I said, if you Google him, he has such a strong media online presence because he has a lot of books like it. The latest one, I believe, is "It Takes a Village to Dupe the Public," and of course he has the hidden history and an expose of modern crimes, conspiracy, and cover up. And he has crimes and cover ups in American politics, then bulliocracy, and also survival of the richest. First of all, Dan, I really like the titles of your books. They speak for itself. And although it seems like the topic is American focus, but what Dan does is he's able to connect all of those books and themes to what's happening globally. So I believe my first question would be, done with all the prolific writing that you do on even regular blogging, what goes on with Don Jeffries' head? How do you manage it to know all of this and put them together and still come here with a smile and still able to go to sleep?
Well, I don't sleep that great, but yeah, many people have asked what goes on in my head. But yeah, these are. I've been interested in these subjects for a very long time. I started out with working as a teenager for Mark Lane, who wrote Rush to Judgment, the most popular New York Times bestseller, criticism of the Warren Report. So I was a JFK assassination guy for a while. That was my obsession. It's still my wheelhouse issue. And Hidden History is full of stuff about the JFK assassination. But I just started, you start looking into other things. It's logical to go from JFK to RFK and MLK, and then JFK Jr., which I was the first one to conduct an independent investigation of. I think it was another Kennedy assassination. Oklahoma City, Waco, and obviously 9/11. You start opening these doors, and you can't close them back, and you start seeing, and that's what Hidden History especially is about, the interconnection between all these issues. They all have the same similarities. Unnatural deaths, tons of body counts and unnatural deaths associated with these things. It's dangerous to look in these subjects up. Missing and destroyed evidence, and most important, you have the incredibly inept performance of the state-controlled media. And I compare our media in America to TASS and Pravda at the height of the Soviet Union. The only difference is the Soviet people understood that it was state-controlled media. The majority of Americans don't. They look at their absurd so-called journalists on television, and they actually think these people are investigative reporters. They're not. So nothing I do would be possible. I couldn't have written these books or these critiques, on Substack and elsewhere, if we had a free press that was doing their job, because they would have solved this stuff a long time ago and exposed what the lies were being told. But they don't. So it opens the door for alternative people like me.
Well, when it comes to the media, so where did that start then? And I'm sure you have covered that in one or many of your books. Okay, so meaning to say, how did this journalist or journalists who want to be journalists now, ended up not really doing their part as exposing the truth?
Well, I think certainly in my lifetime, for the JFK assassination on, I think you can put a timeline there how the media became progressively worse in terms of covering up for the authorities. Which is basically, if you read any news story, it's full of authorities say, officials say. That's all they do. They just quote authorities and officials, and these authorities and officials have been proven corrupt over and over again. But they never question the authorities. They never question the officials. But it goes back farther than that. I mean, in crimes and cover-ups, 1776 and 1963, which has a foreword by Ron Paul, which I'm very proud of. It's a kind of a prequel to Hidden History, and I go over some of the earlier issues from the founding of the Republic on. And certainly Lincoln has been misrepresented and the war between the states, and I talk about how so much misinformation has been out there about that. So the press, even at that time, it became consolidated, I think, after the Civil War, and it just increased as we became, involved more globally in World War I and World War II, and then the Cold War and our adventurous escapades. The latest of which, you see Afghanistan. It's just another example of this disastrous bipartisan foreign policy we have, where we constantly go and meddle in other countries for no reason at all. It serves no purpose. People are killed and die for no reason, and then we can't even conduct a withdrawal. When we finally decide to do the right thing and get out, we're so inept now. There's so much incompetence mixed with corruption that we can't even do it right. But it's where it started. I don't know that we ever had a truly free press. But certainly in my lifetime, once I started investigating the JFK assassination and got over my naivety because I wanted to be a journalist, I understood that it's not possible. If you're an investigative journalist in this country, you wind up like Gary Webb, who I think they killed, and they claimed he shot himself twice in the head. And again, that's our media reporting that he shot himself twice in the head after he exposed the CIA's links to the Contras and bringing crack cocaine into the inner cities. But that's unfortunately what happens to real investigative journalists. There's no room for it. You have to just be mouthpieces for the state if you're going to work for the media.
So you've been busy writing and blogging and interviews, and we're busy also podcasting. What are the ways that can people really do to, be our own investigative journalists? If with all the censoring that we all have experienced, can it ever be? Can we ever come to the point that most people will really listen?
Well, I would like to think so. I think we have converted. I think there's a lot more people that are awake now, certainly, than when I started out as a teenager in the mid 1970s. But there's a lot more people, certainly, especially females. I mean, back then there were no females that were awake that I knew of. Now there's plenty of them. So there and young people too. But as has been shown in the last year and a half since this what I call a pandemic has started, uh, we're greatly outnumbered. There's no question about that. So those of us, but we're trying to do what we can with the platforms we have. This platform, I have a couple of shows, so I use those platforms. Other people, there's other great shows that I appear on. There are people who do. I'm on Jeff Rent's. He has a big platform. I'm on there every Monday. Those platforms are important, and they're drawing audiences. I was on David Knight's show yesterday. He can get up like 1 million downloads sometimes. Those platforms are important, and I try to advertise these shows as much as I can, and certainly blogs, writing on Substack or my blog. I'm doing what countless other people are doing, and they fear what we're seeing right here today. We have 5 people sitting and giving unfiltered opinions or giving our perspectives on things that are not because we're $1 million talking heads on television, and the executives are telling us what you can and can't say, which is what happens here. At least I don't know about the other countries, but it certainly happens here. They fear that. They hate the idea that somebody like me or you or anybody can go online and just type out something and give their perspective. This is how I see things, without it being filtered through a television network or censorship. And of course, we see the response on the part, unfortunately, the last couple of years, especially with YouTube deplatforming all the big, most popular conspiracy-friendly people. We see it happening on Twitter, Facebook with the fact checkers, and Instagram. Deplatformed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And obviously, Twitter got rid of Donald Trump for the president of the United States at that time. So it's hard to combat. It is, but we have to try, and that's all. As long as they give me these platforms, I'm going to keep talking and I'm going to keep writing. And we need to have more and more people doing it. And hopefully, I hear from people every day from all around the world that saw me or listened to me, and it's very gratifying to know you're reaching people. I'm not reaching enough, I know, but that's all we can do, and hope that eventually, one of my favorite expressions is of Robert Kennedy. In South Africa, he said, tiny ripples of hope. He talked about sending forth tiny ripples of hope, and eventually, if enough tiny ripples of hope form together, they can make a tidal wave, overcome the mightiest walls of oppression and justice. So everything I do is an attempt to try to send forth a tiny ripple of hope.
Thanks for your thoughts. And what in one of your interviews, Don, you also mentioned that for America, and for me, it's a first world country, but now it is becoming a third world country. Share me your thoughts and observation on what's in the third world country, like in the Philippines, that is happening already here in America.
Well, I've never been, I guess, to a third world country, really. I mean, I was in the Bahamas briefly on a cruise, but I mean, I don't know if that's third world, but so I don't know how to compare it. All I can do is compare America to itself and what it was even 20 years ago, certainly 30, 40 years ago. It's not the same thing. We have, if you drive, my friend Cynthia McKinney, the former congressperson, who's wonderful, but her voice has been stifled. She can't get back in office because she tells the truth. That's why they got rid of her in Congress. But she told me she was driving through France a couple of years ago. She drove all across France in a car, and she said, I haven't encountered a single pothole. And that's telling. France is a first world country. It has the trappings. It may not have our wealth, but it has the trappings. They prioritize other first world countries, even China. I mean, it's a terrible totalitarian society, but they do have a clean and solid infrastructure. America's infrastructure is a joke, and that was one of the biggest appeals of Donald Trump during his 2016 campaign. He pointed out one of the many giant elephants in the room. I'd been talking behind the scenes about, I live in one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. Our infrastructure is a disgrace. If a strong wind can knock these antiquated power grids out, you can't go. Cynthia McKinney went an entire country without a pothole. You can't go a block in my county, so I can't imagine what it must be like in Mississippi and Arkansas, the poor areas. It's disgraceful. We haven't upgraded the infrastructure here since the Eisenhower administration. We don't prioritize. Instead, we're off in these horrible, escapades in foreign lands, and our leaders are lining their pockets and finding out new ways that they can give themselves raises and bonuses and money under the table. But things for the people, it doesn't happen. So while we still have the wealth, we have greater wealth than any country in the world. So by that standard, I guess maybe we're first world because of that. But it's distributed so poorly. Most people don't know. In my book, Survival of the Richest, I talked about the bottom 50% of America. That's half, and that was then. That was written in 2017. It's gotten worse, but we'll still say it's 50%. Has virtually nothing. They make less than $27,000 a year. The bottom half of the country, which in America today, that you can't get an apartment on that in almost any area of the country, and they have less than 1% of the collective wealth. Half of the country. So you have those awful stats like, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and a couple other guys have more wealth than that whole entire bottom half of the country together. So you can't, it doesn't matter how rich you are if no one sees the wealth. And certainly since the shutdown happened, where they destroyed untold numbers of small businesses, we have no idea what the disparity of wealth must be now. I probably need to write an updated version of Survival of the Richest, but it's got to be even bleaker than it was. But so we may be a first world country, but it's in name only. And we certainly have the world's mightiest military we've ever seen. But what is the point of it? We couldn't even, get out of Afghanistan. And obviously, whatever we were doing there had no impact because the Taliban was able to just take the country over in a day or something. So, I'm not sure what kind of significance we had anyway or other. So we're very misguided. And it's not because of the people, although the people are largely dumbed down and they become very passive. That's why you don't see any protests here. You see protests in England, you see protests in France. You saw a million people, or as many went to see Bobby Kennedy talk last year in Berlin. And again, our state-controlled media, complete blackout of that. Here you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking at the exact site of his uncle, John F. Kennedy, president. One of probably his most famous speech, the Ian Berliner speech, and speaking and blasting the American government, blasting Bill Gates, blasting the lockdown and the medical tyranny that has come upon us. And the media, it was nobody reported. I wrote an article about it for American Free Press, which is the last free newspaper in America. I write there regularly. Again, tiny ripples of hope. I don't know what kind of how many people they even reach, but it's a limited circulation. But that's all we can do is try to get around the blackout of mainstream media and now social media.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate where you focus your talents. And I'll pass it on to Roy because there'll be so much more interesting questions and comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Hi, Donald. We touched on the censorship because I've been kicked off YouTube. I know Chris has been kicked his platform off Anchor, which is Spotify, which most people wouldn't even hear of. Are your books self-published, or do you have a publisher? And have you kind of experienced kind of shadow banning and stuff like that and attacks for what you're doing? Because you're exposing for a long time now.
Well, I am definitely being shadow banned on Facebook because I used to have a big influence there, but I still post. I don't know why I do, because people don't see the posts and it gets very limited exposure. Other than that, no, I mean, I don't do Twitter enough. I need to be more active there, so I guess they haven't bothered with me. I don't have a big following. As far as publishing, I have not self-published, and all my books have been published. Most of them have been published by Skyhorse, which is about the biggest publisher someone like me could get, writing about the things I write about. And they're actually have now become a division of Simon & Schuster, which is one of the biggest publishers in the world. So I actually have a Simon & Schuster page, and I just hope the people at the top of Simon & Schuster don't take a close look at, my titles of my books, because they're probably going to say, "What? How did this guy sneak in?" But in fact, I used to joke when I first got a publisher. It says, Simon & Schuster's never going to publish me, as an example. And well, technically they have. Their name's associated with me, but it's getting harder. I'm working on what is essentially Hidden History 3 as we speak. And although Skyhorse originally asked for it, they've now backed off. And they're saying, well, conspiracy books aren't selling as well, which is ridiculous. Hidden History is still selling extremely well, especially for today's market. But they may be pressured as well. And realistically, in America, there are about 3 publishers that will publish conspiracy type books, anything that hints of conspiracies. And Skyhorse is by far the biggest. So I hope they publish the next book. But if not, I have a friend that has embarked on publishing, and he's probably going to publish my book. I'm writing a book about the pandemic, which has the tentative title of Masking the Truth. And I'm still working at it as we speak. And so I would probably use him to do Hidden History 3 as well. And then I have a built-in base of at least a certain amount of readers, so I think it would sell regardless. What I'd certainly make a lot more money doing it that way. But no, I haven't had to self-publish yet. And there's just because as a writer, if you consider yourself a serious writer, although I know that lots of bigger writers have self-published now, there's still a stigma attached to it in my mind, and so I kind of try to stay away from it. But I may go there, and obviously I'll make more money doing it. I'll just have.
Okay. And there's a load of different things from the books that you've done and everything, but one that I'd like to touch on, because a lot of people are kind of looking for how's this going to kind of pan out. And I know that you've discussed like the Nuremberg Trials, so you'd like to just kind of touch on that.
Yeah, well, I think there's certain subjects like that I don't know anybody else in America that has touched on that in a long time, and I'm surprised. Really, I haven't. When people have interviewed me about crimes and cover-ups, and Ron Paul wrote the foreword to it, so he obviously didn't really object to it. I'm surprised I didn't get more flack from it, because really, I think I'm the first person since really early in the post-World War II era to criticize the Nuremberg trials. And now, especially today, we still hear both left and right, talking about Nuremberg this and Nuremberg that, and it's become in the public's mind, it's become associated with the ultimate brand of justice. This is something Nuremberg, the Nuremberg Code. Well, if you look at the Nuremberg trials, and I talk about them in Crimes and Cover-Ups, they were blasted harshly by people at first, and one of those who blasted them was John F. Kennedy, a young senator, and most people don't realize that Kennedy devoted an entire chapter of Profiles in Courage, his best-selling book, to Senator Robert Taft. And he called him a profile in courage. And Robert Taft was one of the last really great Republicans. Would have been a fantastic president until people like Earl Warren and a young Richard Nixon engineered his ouster in favor of Eisenhower in 1952. But Taft was very critical of the Nuremberg Code, and he said what I'm basically saying is this is unprecedented. In the history of warfare, no other victor attempted to put the loser on trial, to put them in a courtroom and say, we're going to try you. You not only lost the war. I mean, typically spoils of war was that you'd surrender, and most often a lot of the victors would be at least somewhat gracious. And if you conquested a land, then you took the land. But once a side surrendered, was considered over, but we actually started this. What led the way to that was a Treaty of Versailles after World War I, and of course that paved the way for Hitler. Again, what I call the court historians won't admit this because they're not going to acknowledge anything that smacks of pre-planning or conspiracy, to use the dreaded word. But after World War I, the victor nations in the United States, England, and France, they determined that the loser, Germany, was going to have to pay reparations to the losers. And one of the ugly facts of history that most people are always amazed by when I tell them, Germany did not stop paying reparations from World War I until 2010. Now, to me, that's a war crime. If anything such as, again, you lose a war and you have to pay the people that beat you, you continually have to pay them. That's what they did. They made Germany do it. So naturally, Germany was ripe for a Hitler because, most people don't know the Great Depression in Germany was way worse than it was in America. And so you paved the way for something like that. But after they took it a step further after World War II, where they said, well, not only have to pay us, but we're actually going to try you in court. And we're going to hang some of you, which is what they did. But we're going to take some of you, we're going to bring into the United States under Operation Paperclip, and you're going to form NASA, which is what we did. We brought a lot of ex-Nazis into the United States, and they helped form NASA, which is another corrupt part of the American government. So people never look at these things, and they just assume that if you look at the way that that Nuremberg was conducted, the original judge was a Soviet, just a bloodthirsty guy from the Soviet Union that had presided over many show trials of dissidents where so many people died in the Soviet Union. So it was not any kind of justice from the standpoint. And I have people like Eisenhower's brothers, Robert Taft, John F. Kennedy. I get sidetracked when I was talking about Robert Taft. Robert Taft criticized it, and Kennedy devoted a whole chapter to calling him a profile in courage. Now, you're not going to hear anybody on the left today, admit that John F. Kennedy criticized it, but he did. And at that time, people in America, there was more of a diversity of opinion, and there's very little diversity now. So if someone like me comes along and questions some sacred cow like Nuremberg, and so far they've ignored it. Because I don't think they can debate it because first of all, they can't debate the facts as why were some Nazis hung and why were some allowed to come into the country and form NASA like Werner von Braun, and what really happened to Hitler. And I discussed that in there. I don't think there's any question Hitler was probably escorted to Argentina and probably lived a long life there. But these are the questions that I'm only able to write these kind of history books, hidden history, because the court historians, as I call them, they won't cover it. What they do is they just ignore evidence to the contrary. So they can cavalierly say Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy, which is the only way you could say something like that is not to have ever studied any evidence associated with the case. But they do, and unfortunately, when I see them on television, I see these professors just spouting out such incredible disinformation about JFK or 9/11 or any of these subjects. There's nobody there like me to counter them. They won't let somebody like me have that platform because their argument won't hold up to somebody that's knowledgeable about it, but it will hold up to an impressionable group of college students that don't know anything, and that's where they usually speak. So, but yeah, Nuremberg is we crossed what I call one of those many moral lines in the sand. We've crossed many of them in our history, and certainly we've crossed a huge one when we shut down all the local businesses here and the mass mandates and all that. But that was a huge line to cross because once you've established that you're going to ignore all the history of warfare and you're going to put the loser on trial. It's a trial of the victor vanquished by the victors, and I think that's I want no part of that, and I don't know why any Americans would be happy with it.
Oh, excellent. And obviously you're seeing through all the different stories that you cover, like I call them the bad boys. We know they're doing it and nothing is done. Have you experienced many that have been caught, and what are your solutions? Because you're reaching audience if you're on different shows as well. Because there's a lot of people out there. We know the problems, but have you got what would be your magic wand for resolving some of this?
Well, I think I don't think there is a magic wand, and I've especially in the last year and a half, and I've given I said when Donald Trump was elected that I didn't think he was sincere, but I thought that was our last hope. Because if he had even attempted any of the rhetoric, to do any of the things he was promising to do, to finally get a grasp on the immigration, to try and bring industry back to the country, and end all these awful trade deals that have decimated American industry and destroyed the working class, if he really brought our troops home and ended our disastrous foreign policy, if he really built the infrastructure, but most importantly, if he drained the swamp. And that term, draining the swamp, that's probably the saddest part of Trump's wasted 4 years, where he literally did nothing but tweet most of the time. But if he had drained the swamp, if you had seen some of those perp walks that we all hoped for, Hillary Clinton and people like that are lifelong criminals that have committed, I've detailed their crimes in my books. I mean, these people are horrible people. They're beyond corrupt, but they get away with it. And I think that's the saddest part of all this, is that we're seeing that you asked if anybody's, but I don't know of anybody at the level of power that has been held accountable for anything. They're utterly above the law. The law cannot touch them. I mean, you have somebody like Hunter Biden, who's the son of the son of the president now, the United States. From what I've heard, there was video of him raping a 10-year-old Chinese girl on his laptop. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I don't know what else you would need to see, and there are lots of other nasty things on there as well. And the same thing was said about the Anthony Weiner's laptop, the former New York guy that supposedly had Hillary Clinton doing some horrible things on there. But the public never gets to see that. And it doesn't matter what the evidence is, because they are utterly above the law. And I don't think America can ever call itself any kind of a democracy or a constitutional republic until we admit that we're just not going to hold the people that have power to the same standards. The laws don't apply to them, because if they did, most of the people in Washington, D.C. would be in jail. They'd be locked away for a long time, but they're not. So I think the only hope I see, and I do hold out hope for what we're seeing at the local school boards, including my neighboring county of Loudoun County, Virginia. The parents there have been very active in addressing the school boards and calling them tyrants, which they are, and really chewing them out for the horrible curriculum that is polluting the minds of the children here. Not to mention forcing them to wear masks and stuff when there's excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. When there's virtually no chance of them getting COVID. But we'll see if they can make any inroads, because I think that's the only way change is possible, reform is possible in America. But we may be able to do something at that level, bottom level. So if we can start recalling some of those school board officials, getting them to resign and disgrace, and getting some honest people in there, and it may start cascading upwards. And maybe you can get some honest mayors and maybe some governors, some state legislatures, police chiefs, things like superintendents, city managers. That's where we have to, I think, focus, because the national level is impossible. The politicians we have in Congress, the White House, Supreme Court, these people are might as well be lords and emperors. They might as well wear crowns. You can't hold them accountable. And so I think we have to try to do what we can do. And that's unfortunately, that's the only hope I see, because beyond that, I'm very disillusioned about what's happening here.
Excellent. And you mentioned the schools, and I know your book, Bulliocracy, where the teachers bullying and stuff. You might go into that, because it's something that, because I have a speaking podcast, and nearly all of my guests, they've all been bullied, and it goes on a lot. And people, I don't know. I think people keep it into themselves. They don't want to, let people know that there's been bullying going on, but it seems to be rampant around the world.
Yeah, I think it is. And I tried to find out more about how it is in the world. I know what it's like in America, because in America, our school systems revolve around this concept of popularity. And that's why I called the subtitle is How the Social Hierarchy Enables Bullies to Rule Schools, Workplaces, and Society at Large. It's a social hierarchy. And the concept of popularity drives it. And of course, popularity in America is built around sports, mostly football and our football, not soccer, American football and basketball mostly, and cheerleaders. The girls are cheerleaders, and the kids know where they stand in that pecking order. And it's just recently that studies have shown what a lot of us knew all along, that the bullies are not these troubled kids from the other side of the tracks, and maybe their father is beating him as an alcoholic and he's taking out all his pain, what he's going through on the other kids. No, it doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, it's the popular kids that are bullies. They're finding that out. And that's why they never get punished. And that's why you see, I have tons and tons of stories in Bulliocracy. The system always reacts the same. And this is what I'm talking about, how systemic, how large the corruption is. If your system is so corrupt, if your society is so diseased and corrupt that you can't even hold, if some kid is torturing another kid during the day where you have adult authority figures everywhere in those buildings, how is any of this happening? Security cameras everywhere. How is any bullying happening? Yet it manages to happen. And you have police presence now. We have police officers in every one of our schools now. They never stop bullying ever because, again, most police officers were former bullies. It's a bully personality that fits law enforcement perfectly. So they're rooting for the bully. And the teachers we find, again, as you mentioned, more and more examples, unfortunately, of teachers who are the bullies themselves. And there was a very viral video that went viral here on YouTube. I don't know, they might have taken it off by now, of a guy that middle-aged man addressing his school board, talking about being bullied, years ago in that same school district. And he pointed at the president of the school board and said, "And you were the one who stuck my head in the urinal. You were the main bully." And you can just see the guy, he instantly kind of reverted back to a bully. But so what hope do you have? Who knows how many other people at that level were bullies? So it worked for them. They're bullies. So who are they going to be rooting for? The bullies and the victims. So it's a big subject. And unfortunately, again, the problem is so big and the corruption is so extensive that I have gotten very little support. I've heard from lots of readers, like you talk about. So many people have been bullied. This has touched an issue that's touched almost every family in America. Said, wow, you spoke for me. I went through this, and it's great to hear that. But all the so-called anti-bullying organizations, they aren't interested in my book at all. None of them have asked me to speak. None of them contacted me about the book because I found, looking at them, that most of them are not trying to eradicate bullying. And in fact, they always defend the school systems, which is the problem. School systems are the problem. And now I think we're finding, since the lockdown, people are finally focused. I think more and more people are saying what kind of awful teachers America has by and large. I'm sorry, they just do. When you see the way they've acted on this, where they don't want to teach the children, they're showing out partying on the beach, and we have videos of this, and they don't want to go to work. And it doesn't surprise me because I wrote a book about bullying, and I can give you, example after example how at best they just, didn't listen to a child that came to them as the authority figure and said, "Hey, this is happening to me." They dismissed it or called them tattletales. But these are the same people that don't want to teach your kids or have transgender story hour or or whatever. They're double masking. So it doesn't surprise me at all. But that's it's one of the books I feel most passionate about, and I've been interviewed on it some, but the conspiracy books get more attention than that one does. But obviously, I think it's a really important subject.
Yeah, no, excellent. Listen, thank you very much, Donald, and I'll pass you on to Steve.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Wow, it's great hearing you guys talk. So where do I begin? I guess, Don, just as a little bit of a backstory, I mean, I'm quite cynical because I've been so far down the rabbit hole that, to me, everything's pantomime. It's not supposed to work. There are supposed to be potholes. They're not supposed to be fixed. I've heard you talk about the infrastructure that our tax money paid for in Afghanistan. They're building infrastructure in Afghanistan and creating enemies by funding, the Taliban and ISIS. So it's not supposed to work because that's satanic inversion. So that's part of my frustration. So to me, everything is a charade. And to expect, we know presidents have no power. They're just puppets. To me, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergs, the Rothschilds, the Fabian Society, the secret societies, they control, especially the Council on Foreign Relations, was created in 1917 to create the UN, to create the CIA, to steer public policy, to control both parties, Democrat and Republican, to create another divide and rule concept that puts two people in two boxes, creates divide. But my point is, to me, since 1917, or at least, since World War II, presidents have been selected. I mean, Truman was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite. He dropped 2 bombs on, apparently on civilian installations. So we're watching a movie, and it's not supposed to work. And, to complain about what's going on in Afghanistan is it's moot, because it's supposed to be like this, So I'm just sort of venting because it's my frustration, and I know you know this. So I'm going to lead into a question that is a personal question of mine, because the Kennedy family is apparently an elite family, and let's face it, you'd have to be an idiot to think Lee Harvey Oswald, who they let get murdered on TV, the only suspect, they let the murder of a president, supposedly the murder of a president, get murdered. To think he killed JFK is ridiculous, and to think Sirhan alone killed RFK is ridiculous. Sirhan, it looks like he was a Manchurian candidate. There was 12 gunshots. He had 8. So my point is, are the Kennedys, do they have to keep quiet? They know what's going on, right? My question is kind of like, and now that Sirhan is like apparently going to be paroled, this is all another psyop. Wouldn't the Kennedys say, let him be paroled because he didn't kill my father? Why don't, no one ever says that? And that's my frustration. Like, do they know what's going on? They have to.
Well, I think they do, and you mentioned Sirhan being paroled, and I had the Donald Jeffries show that airs every Wednesday now, and last night I had on my show Paul Schrade, who was one of the shooting victims in the Ambassador Hotel. He's 96 years old, still in remarkably great shape, great guest, and also had one of Sirhan's old lowriers on, Lori Dusek, and so just talking about that, but excuse me. Unfortunately, RFK's children. RFK Jr. is great. He's front and center, and he's become kind of pariah in the Kennedy family. And there was one other brother, but Rory Kennedy and Joe Kennedy the third, who used to serve in Congress, kind of a nondescript. He certainly was no RFK Jr. They came out strongly, and in fact, of course, the New York Times gave a platform to Rory Kennedy about, you can't let the guy that killed my dad out, which was amazing because they have been, I call it kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy on the Kennedy part. The part which started with Jackie Kennedy, who started this curious attitude of this can't be. And you look at Caroline Kennedy, who's, I think he's 4 years old now, and she still recoils if anybody talks about her father dying. You're talking about almost 60 years ago, and you can't talk about it. This is ridiculous. Whereas her brother JFK Jr. was the only Kennedy behind the scenes, and I found this out again in Hidden History. I conducted the first independent investigation into his death, and I found out from his high school girlfriend and from someone in his adult inner circle that strongly requested to remain anonymous. There's still that fear there that behind the scenes, he had a quest to find out who killed his father. In fact, he talked about it all the time behind the scenes. And he knew that Oswald hadn't done it, and it was a source of contention, especially between him and his sister Caroline. They were estranged to a great degree in the last years of his life, and I think largely because of that. So they weren't all that way. And there's some indication it's possible, a couple of other RFK's kids died. Drug overdose, David, another one ran into a tree while supposedly playing football and skiing. Typical Kennedy death. Nobody dies like that except Kennedys. But so who knows? Maybe behind the scenes they were as well. But yeah, the Kennedy family's attitude has always bothered me. I contrast it to the Martin Luther King family attitude, where Dexter King went and visited James Allray early on in prison, shook his hand and said, "I know you didn't kill my dad." And Coretta Scott King, unlike Jackie Kennedy, at a very advanced age, traveled across state to testify in a trial for James Allray to get a new hearing. So I wish the Kennedys had acted like that. I can't begin to tell you, other than RFK Jr., who has become very bolder and bolder. But the rest of the family, you're right. I mean, if they're supposedly, when I talk to people about this, they say, well, they fear. They're doing this out of fear. Well, if they thought they were going to kill more of them, their strategy hasn't been successful because, in Hidden History, I chronicled all the strange deaths of the Kennedys, and there's more than you think. And they're still dying. Last year, one of the strangest of all, RFK Jr.'s niece, died in a bizarre accident out here on the Chesapeake Bay, not far from me. supposedly she took her 8-year-old son out on a choppy Chesapeake Bay to chase a kickball. Only one of the richest families in the world couldn't replace a kickball.
Yeah, I
So,
heard that.
yeah, so we're supposed to believe these things, and I'm skeptical of everything. But like you, and I'd urge you to I think it was on Substack, I wrote an article not that long ago called "Everybody's in Showbiz," where I play around with that myself. I'm very much influenced by the Truman Show type of mentality, and certainly looking into things like Sandy Hook and Boston bombing and things like that. When you come across, I mean, again, in Bulliocracy, I researched these shooter drills at schools, and there are such things as crisis actors. They exist. And in fact, there used to be crisisactors.org. I see they have scrubbed the website now and find it
Yeah.
anymore, but it did exist. And they advertise for these people.
The
And
government has a company called Mulan something, and they train soldiers in mock
yes.
and they have people without limbs, but they didn't have their legs blown off. And if you saw the film of it, you would think it's real.
Yeah, and so when they ridicule people talking about Sandy Hook or Boston bombing or any of these other things, it's a very small step to go to ask that question, because if I detail some of these,
Yeah.
and some of these are psychologically damaging to children. What are they doing? They're not telling the children to shoot, so they don't know. They think it's a real shit. And some of these kids are young elementary students. Sometimes they don't tell the teachers, and they employ actors, crisis actors. They use fake blood. They use fake bullets, fake
Yeah.
medical, all the stuff that some people are claiming happens at Sandy Hook and Boston bombing and these other incidents. So how is that an outlandish notion when you know the government is already doing that and admitting it? And
Well,
so of
the
course we're going to.
recent Afghanistan thing, you can tell that the plane
Yes.
looks inflatable. There's no engines in it, and
would people really do that? I mean,
and there's a guy actually he's looking at his cell phone. He's on the side of the plane, sitting on the plane, looking at his cell phone as this drill is going on. And so at any rate, my part of my frustration, just you kind of covered it, but it was like, if the Kennedy, I guess the Kennedys have to be quiet, because they'll get killed. Because why wouldn't they just come out and say, you think Lee Harvey Oswald, the murderer, you think the Secret Service would let this guy get murdered on TV? I mean, you think he really killed? I mean, so that's that's part of what I wanted to ask you, and you did get to it. So, but getting back to the Kennedy assassination, and the Jim Garrison tapes and John Barber, I was riveted by Mark Lane's performance. Well, not performance, because he was genuine, or at least I thought he was genuine. When he was interviewed by William Buckley, that little snickering Illuminati dirtball. But my point is, Mark Lane on television was riveting in getting the truth across about what was happening. But John Barber said Mark Lane was a bit of a shill. Now, I don't know if I was trying to figure out, how was Mark Lane a shill? I know he had ties with Jane Fonda. So can you explain that?
Well, John Barber's a good friend of mine, a great friend. We talked last night, and so we're most rewarding friendship in my life. He's 88
We've had him on twice.
Yeah. Well, I think he probably set this up, because whenever we're on a show, like we always try to tell the people about the other guy.
He's unbelievable.
So I'd say he's amazing.
He has more energy than the entire panel.
Yes, he does. When he calls me, he's 88 years old, and he's still planning things like a teenager. Like he'll say, like, what he's going to.
His story is utterly incredible. I mean, his story is incredible.
It is, and he has a combination of. My next book coming out in another month or so is going to be about showbiz, called Unborrowed Fame. So I have a really big interest in show business too. So John Barber combines the JFK assassination and showbiz in a unique way for me. So we hit it off really well. But Mark Lane, if you've been in the JFK assassination research community as long as I have, first of all, it's totally dysfunctional. Most of them are, they're just. They have huge, difficult egos. They're jealous of each other. I know they're jealous of me. They paid no attention. Hidden History became a bestseller, but it was to no thanks to anybody in the research community, except somebody like John, not really in the community. But Mark Lane, as I said, I worked for him as a teenage volunteer. He was my hero. I really looked up to him as a civil libertarian, the kind of leftist that used to exist in America. But I'm aware of all the allegations about it. He was associated with Jim Jones, and he got out alive. And I have heard these things. And but you hear that about all of the critics. There's Penn Jones, the guy in Texas. Tons of the people now. Everybody kind of accuses each other of working for the CIA or being a disinfo agent. And I'm sure, there are infiltrators everywhere. All you got to do is go onto these forums, and they're full of trolls. I get trolls all the time. I used to, especially before they started shadow banning me on Facebook, they would send trolls in all the time to try to disrupt what I was saying. And but I'm never going to accuse anybody because you can't prove it. And I hope Mark Lane was legitimate. John Barber's never really said anything that bad about him, other than he had. I think I met Mark Lane years ago, but I think he had maybe he didn't live up to his expectations in something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but certainly it's legitimate to question anybody. Sylvia Marr, that wrote Accessories After the Fact, one of the best books about the assassination, she turned on Jim Garrison just because he didn't answer her letter fast enough or something. I mean, those are the kind of egos that are in this. And that's the unfortunate part of somebody like me, is that you encounter these people, and whether it's JFK assassination, 9/11, or any of these subjects, the people that are open-minded and gravitate towards them, they tend to have problematic personalities. And so sometimes they're difficult to deal with. Now, Mark Lane, I didn't find him that way at all. But I understand the allegations against him, and a lot of it revolves around the Jim Jones thing. That why was he associated? He was his attorney, and he made it out alive, and nobody else did. I don't know. I mean, all I can do is look at what his work on the surface. His work. He was a great civil libertarian, and that's what I like to consider myself as. So I'd be very disillusioned further if he wasn't legitimate. But I don't know. I don't have any proof.
He came across as genuine to me. I mean, when he had the pipe and he gave that present, that he was interviewed, and Buckley was supposed to shred him to pieces, and he shredded Buckley to pieces, and that was just unbelievable. I mean, do you think? I'm just sort of talking generally, because let's just say the word is that the Kennedy family is of the elite, and perhaps maybe. Do you think JFK was on board for the New World Order, and then he changed his mind? Like, how do you think it works? Because they don't let anyone in office who's not on board, whether it's Democrat or Republican. It's just the same team wearing different jerseys, right?
Exactly. And I think Kennedy was probably the last person they let in, and they're not going to make that mistake again. But I think they let him in because on the surface, he had the veneer of a typical establishment internationalist. He said, "I'm a citizen of the world." He belonged to a local chapter of the CFR, and he had gone to Harvard. He studied under John Maynard Keynes, but I'm sure they were worried about his father, and a lot of the Kennedy hatred. And I talk a lot about this in History and Hidden History 3. I'm going into it further, because the left absolutely despises the Kennedys. They still do, and they always have. I mean, I have the quotes in Hidden History from Malcolm X to William Kunstler, who was the leftist lawyer for the Chicago 8 at the Democratic Convention. They're vicious things they said about the Kennedys. I mean, Kunstler said it was a good thing they were assassinated. And he said it publicly. And nothing, everybody just kind of nods, yeah. And you could never say that about, FDR or Truman or even LBJ. Certainly not Bill Clinton or somebody like that. But they say whatever they want about the Kennedys. And I think that a lot of the hatred of them goes back to old Joe Kennedy. And he had all the right enemies. I mean, FDR hated him. Churchill hated him. He was against World War II. He was an America firster, and he had a very good reason for that. He said, I have a lot involved here. I have a tremendous investment with my sons. I don't want them to get killed. And as it turned out, he lost his oldest son and he lost his oldest daughter in separate plane crashes. So he had a right to be worried, because it was on a personal level. But most people don't know it. I discovered this through RFK Jr.'s book, Family Values. I did not know that in the 1950s, the CIA hatred of the Kennedys really began with the old man. Joe Kennedy served on a very little publicized commission in the 1950s to study the intelligence agencies. And
I guarantee you that was Prescott Bush generated. I guarantee it.
Yeah, well, but Kennedy, he recommended that the CIA be stripped of all of its powers except intelligence gathering. This was the 1950s. So you can imagine the ripples. Alan Dulles, was predisposed to hate Kennedy because of that. And certainly, I do have to wonder why. And then you get into the kind of theatrical aspect of it. They let Kennedy come into office just to assassinate him. I don't know. Do they want this to happen?
Mhm.
Was this part of the plan? Let's martyr him. Let's have something like that. I don't know.
Build a Camelot and then destroy it.
Yeah, because it certainly they had enough to worry about with old Joe Kennedy, but Kennedy was also saying a lot of the right things for them. He was buying into the Cold War rhetoric, support any foe, that kind of thing. His inaugural address, while beautifully written, was just kind of a Cold War rhetoric. But it wasn't until I think they first got worried when the Bay of Pigs thing fell apart, and he didn't provide air support, and then he fired Allen Dulles. And Cabell himself, top three people in the CIA.
Dulles, who was the head of the Warren Commission? Dulles.
Yeah, well, he was the most powerful member. Exactly. He was the most active member. And Cabell, Charles Cabell, his brother was Governor Earl Cabell of Dallas at the time. He was the mayor of Dallas at the time. And we found out in the JFK assassination documents released a couple of years ago, one of the few that had any relevance was a document that verified what a lot of us suspected anyhow, that Mayor Cabell also was a CIA asset as well. So, you probably didn't even have to know that, but the hatred.
And that gets into another thing of the lunacy of, there's a president murdered, but the documents are sealed until 2039.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they work with impunity. They do what they want,
Yeah, and nobody questions these things. Obviously, if there was just a minimum wage loser that had no contacts at all, Lee Harvey Oswald, why would anything be withheld on the grounds of national security? But you can ask, we still have World War I documents that are classified. You have Jack in England. Scotland Yard is still withholding information about the Jack the Ripper murders from 1888.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, the speculation there is people that investigate like myself is that with some royal family involvement, obviously, because there had to be some. Why would you withhold anything about the murders of prostitutes in the East End of London in 1888 unless there was something bigger there? So, when they just kind of give the game away, but it doesn't matter how obvious they make it because, and I think I'm unusual in most of the critics where I think that they like to advertise what they're doing. For instance, it took me many years of investigating the JFK assassination before I finally realized, all this magic bullet I've been talking about, the single bullet that was, pretty much undamaged. I finally asked myself, okay, you have sophisticated plotters. Why would they plant a bullet that looked like it hit nothing? Why wouldn't you plant a bullet that looked like it hit something? They planted a bullet that was identical to test bullets, same ammunition fired into cotton wadding. The commission's own records show that. So I started calling those things calling cards. Another great example is after 9/11, where everything was obliterated, ground into dust, but one of the hijackers' passports floated down and was found intact. Muhammad Atta's passport.
Yeah, well, and they had it solved. I mean, they had it totally solved.
Yeah, calling cards. They're like Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper, taunted the London police, and that's what they're doing. They're taunting.
Yeah. That gets into something I wanted to say to tie in. I said it with John Barber that it's so important. The JFK assassination is so important because it's so riddled with holes. Yet they got away with duping the public, even though the public majority, if you ask, they think something's fishy. But my point is, if you can understand how Dan Rather lied. He said, a simple thing like saying the president jerked forward on the news is he's an aid to the narrative, just like Walter Cronkite lied for decades to the public and perpetuated wars that weren't really about communism or the stopping of communism. He got an award for that. It's important that the same deception's going on today, that the media is lying on the same scale. And
absolutely.
And it happened with 9/11 and it's happening now. So nothing's changed and it's supposed to be this way,
I think, and I've said, that they could literally, and that's why we see some of these things like Sandy Hook or Boston bombing, whatever. I think the reason you see a lot of the witnesses that are so over the top and so ridiculous that back before YouTube was censored, used to have great videos where they would give out the Oscar awards for crisis actors, and they would show clips, and it was great because it called them out because human beings don't act like that.
Oh, in the Paris shooting,
Yes.
they interviewed a guy who was shot, and he blocked it with his cell phone. Right?
I'm not sure which one that is. There's so many.
This was in Paris. So the guy was shot, and his cell phone, it hit his cell phone and didn't kill him. And,
yeah.
Well,
I think the Paris one was the one that featured the obvious mannequins thrown on the street that were supposed to be victims hit by the runaway bus. I used to pay attention to these things, and then of course I think the best example was the gay nightclub in Florida, the Pulse nightclub, where the shooting, and originally they showed video of these two heroic guys, carrying out a victim who, again, all these victims, you're not sure where the injury is, what's exactly going on, but they carried him out. And so, okay, that's a heartwarming story, but they're going in the wrong direction, actually. Some people pointed that out. But when they showed the entire clip of the entire video, you can see after it gets out of they suddenly let the guy down, and they all start dancing around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's out. It used to be out there to see. So, how do you analyze
they have some of the same actors at different false flags.
Yes.
And, at the Boston bombing, they had the guy in the cowboy hat.
Yes.
I mean, he's a career job for the military. So time's running. I wanted to read on April 27th, 1961, JFK held a speech where he talked to the press corps of the day, and he opened up the speech by mentioning Karl Marx, and that Karl Marx, went on to do what he did because they didn't give him a $5 raise at a newspaper at the Herald Tribune in London. And it's just he would not have started his speech to the press corps and mentioned Karl Marx if it wasn't deliberate. There's a reason, because the New World Order is a Marxist movement, it's, or whatever you want to call it. It's a Zionist, a Jesuit Marxist movement. But in this speech, I wanted, we were talking about how infiltrated this cancer is from the top down in a military precision, compartmentalized precision where people don't know what's going on. This is what he said in this speech that will require to beat this. He said, I'll just read like one. It says, it would require a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic, ruthless conspiracy. I mean, so even he back then in 1961 was saying, the only way to do this would be for everyone to be awake and for everyone to stop it.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's pretty obvious, and that's the problem for people like us. Is, and I'm sure you've encountered it. And I have a very large family, and the only one I've been able to wake up is my son. No one else is awake, but I've woken up lots of people all over the world apparently, because I hear from them, or at least they're I don't know how many, but the people around me I can't, and other people, I've interviewed so many whistleblowers from Wolfgang Halbig to Richard Gage of 9/11 Architects and Engineers of Truth. So many of their marriages broke up because of these things. Their families abandoned them, and it's very sad. And it takes a lot of courage. One of my favorite stories I got from John Barber was, he worked with Jim Garrison closely, is that when Garrison, again, abandoned his wife, you've seen JFK and Sissy Spacek, and he says, damn, Liv, I can't fight the whole world and you too. And he's exactly right. He was doing that. And in real life, his wife, is portrayed by Sissy Spacek, abandoned him. She couldn't take the heat and she left him. And what he did at the end of his life was the most courageous thing he ever did. She abandoned him. He called her to his bedside when he was dying and demanded that they be remarried so that she could collect his pension. And to me, that's courage that very few people would have. So whenever anybody talks about Garrison, I say, look, he did that. I haven't heard of anybody doing too many more courageous things than that, but that's the price most whistleblowers pay. And people that are they get abandoned by their family, they get canceled in one way or another. And it's a shame.
Well, because I was riveted by Jim Garrison, and I like you said, I mean, he's that kind of guy where you just say he's 1 in a billion, this man. Yep. And where can we watch that? Is it the Garrison Files by John Barber?
Yeah, you got to go to John Barber's World, I think it is. But and even beyond the Garrison Files, the John Barber's second movie is even better. It's the American Media and the Second Assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Seen that too.
Yeah,
okay.
That's a really good overall indictment. It's the Garrison tapes, I believe, was the original one.
Jim Garrison tapes.
Yeah, the Garrison tapes, and that's really good. It focuses more on Garrison, but the other one that he did really focuses on the failure of the American media. Because again, all this we're talking about here today with the free press, and again, I don't know how the press is in Ireland or England as opposed to, but I know how much we brag about having a free press here. And we have a First Amendment, which is supposed to mean something. But if you've been following the news, you must realize that very few people in public life, especially the left, where I came from as a civil libertarian, the left today that has power does not believe in the First Amendment at all. They want to cancel anybody they don't agree with. So they don't believe in free speech. And I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but that's America's big problem, is that we've allowed people, these tyrants, to control us, where they don't want us to be saying these things. They want us canceled in one way or another for having the nerve to view these kinds of perspectives.
If they could, they'd give us frontal lobotomies, every one of us.
Yes, I mean, yes, they would. Yes.
I mean, the last thing I want to say before I pass you to Chris is the amazing thing. If you watch the Jim Garrison tapes and you get into the JFK, and he solved the case of the JFK murder, which was a conspiracy by the CIA that murdered JFK. But when I woke up, the astonishment of what this world really is, every layer I peeled off of this onion, I just thought it was going to end. It has to get better. And it just got worse and worse. And I think I could see I think he had a similar experience where he just couldn't believe. He was trying to tell the public, you guys have no idea how far this goes. And no one would listen. And that's pretty much what happens today. So I'm going to pass you to Chris. Thanks. It's really great. I love your work. And I passed the Cynthia McKinney interview you did, because she was the only one in Congress that ever spoke the truth that I ever heard. And, your interview with her, I just sent around to everybody. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, Don. Thanks for coming on. We're all podcasters here, obviously trying to wake people up consistently on a daily basis, week to week, etc., etc. You've been exposing stuff for, decades and writing lots of books. And you just mentioned, obviously, the only one in your family at the moment that is awake is your son. I've also seen the blog that you wrote as well, that I think it's, you're not invited to a wedding unless you get, a negative test or vaccinated, etc., etc. So just shows the kind of sad times we're in. And it shows it gives us a bit of this hope to realize that someone like yourself and the extended family that you have, and after decades of writing and research that you have with loved ones around you, your son is the only person who's actually awake to what is actually going on. How does that settle with you? I mean, can you still talk to family members, or besides from the one you're not allowed to the latest wedding, or how do you cope with that? Or is it kind of a certain thing, a long time ago, you've just got over it and you go, look, this is the way it is. They're not going to wake up. I need to get on with my life. Or how does Don cope with that situation?
My family had been hearing me ranting and raving behind the scenes for decades. And I did, my first book was published in 2007, my novel, the only fiction I've had published. And that didn't cause that. They were kind of supportive of that. When I started, with Hidden History, especially because it did get a lot of attention. And I was on RP television. I was on the Travel Channel, and I coast to coast many times. So I think because I got a little bit of notoriety for it, I don't know what it caused, jealousy or whatever, but it became a subject that couldn't be discussed anymore. They weren't interested in it at all. So I just stopped talking about it. And I realized I had never influenced any of them all the years. You think they might look and say, hey, this, he was talking about that decades ago. But it hasn't, especially with COVID, that has created a huge wedge. Obviously, if I'm not, can't go to a wedding, and there's a problem with one of my sisters and her kids, because I don't know if I'll see them again. I don't know, because of the vaccine. I'm not going to get vaccinated. My kids aren't going to get vaccinated. So we're kind of pariahs in the family, and it's a shame. And I know it's happening. I hear from people that it's happening in their families too. But what keeps me going, because yeah, I would really be crushed by the lack of support, a lack of interest, from my loved ones. But because I get so much attention from people I don't know all over the world, because I hear from them every day, and that's really gratifying, and it makes up for it because it knows you're touching people, and then I can just kind of attribute it. Well, it's jealousy. It's just they don't want to see me in that light or whatever. And so it's easier to cope with because of that. But if I didn't have the support of those other people, it would be much harder. But I'm gratified, that I have touched some people, especially when you hear that somebody from Australia or New Zealand or Scotland. I hear from people in all those countries. It's really cool to know that your work has gone to the far flung ends of the earth.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a guy I know. I'm actually just curious. Kind of Roy touched on some of it earlier about the writing of your books and stuff like that. Because my point on it is, I know a guy he's wrote 2 books now, and he said the only way he could actually write was to write in silence and away from people. I mean, even his wife didn't know his first book came out until all these hundreds of books arrived at the front door one day. He was away, totally forgot the delivery was coming, and he opened the books and kind of goes, "Holy shit!" She's like, "What's this all about?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I actually wrote a book," and seeing all his name at the back of all these books. But he said that's the only way he could write, because otherwise there'd be too much noise, there'd be too much interference. Are you doing this? Why are you saying that? I don't believe this. It would just ruin what he was actually going to talk about in the books, and he felt he would never change it for anything again. How does your writing process materialize, shall we say?
Well, I'm pretty good at multitasking, and I'm really outgoing, so none of that really. I could never withhold something like that. I mean, they always know what I'm doing, even though they may not be interested. I'm telling them all the time. Well, I'm writing this down, doing this, and I talk to this person and that person. I drop names, especially when I wrote the show business book. I got to know some of these older celebrities, and I'm a shameless name dropper now. But nobody cares. Nobody around me cares. They have zero interest in it, but I still do it. But when I write, I used to write at night, and I did write alone, when no one else is up for. But for some reason, now that I've become a full-time writer, I'm almost like a 9 to 5 writer now. So I go down and I have an office. My wife works at home now too, so I'm down in it now, and it's a place I devote to my interviews. And I have my computer that I used to write with here, and so I just go to have all my research materials around me, and I pretty much just write every day, and it's become it's a ritual. So I said I'm going to work, and that's what I do. So people are in the house, most of the time just my wife, but we don't bother each other too much, but it doesn't distract me if I do. I go, I go upstairs for lunch. I go out and take a walk in the neighborhood, something like that. But I'm usually in front of my computer most of the day now, and then at a certain point, around dinner time, I usually just knock off, and then I probably won't write again till the next day. But I pretty much put in, a day's work, writing.
And do you ever know how long it's going to take you? Have you kind of a set deadline? It's going to take 4 months, or does it just get extended as you find more and more rabbit holes and research to go down?
Well, I thought I was going to have a deadline with Hidden History 3, but they said they're kind of backing off. So, I write pretty fast, and it's a labor of love for me. And I talk to people, so as I'm communicating with people, I incorporate what they tell me into the books. And the more people I talk to, the more material I have. And it's gotten a lot harder to research now, since, like, for instance, when I started writing Hidden History, just in, you're talking about 7 years or so, it has changed so much because this search engine censorship is incredible. You used to be able to find things much easier. Now, I'm trying to, like, I was writing my book about the pandemic. I know that Anthony Fauci was in his position back in 1986 when they passed the law that exempted vaccine makers from liability, legal liability. You can't. So if your kid or your family member has a bad reaction to a vaccine, thanks to Anthony Fauci and company in the 1980s, you can't sue them. They've already established that, but I can't find any articles linking Fauci to that. And I know before they were there. And I have, fortunately, again, I have people again that I don't know in real life, but they're my cyber friends. I have a couple 3 or 4 really super, I don't know, fans or whatever you call them. I hate to say the word fan, but they love my work enough where they put in, I said, what if I could pay you guys? They're like full-time researchers. So they send me tons and tons of stuff, and they're much better at finding stuff than I am. And they know I'm having more trouble with the censorship on the search engine, so they do a really good job circumventing that. But they haven't been able to break the thing on Fauci yet. But I find that a lot. Like I'm looking at even JFK assassination. I'm looking into what happened to this witness or what happened to that witness, and it's tough unless you can locate them. And I do call some of the people, and sometimes you get through. Like Timothy McVeigh from the Oklahoma City bombing, I called his father's house, and his father answered the phone, which was pretty amazing. But he didn't want to talk. Once he knew who I was, I talked for about 30 seconds, and he hung up. But most of the time, when you find these people's phone numbers, they're almost always had been disconnected. So you can't even, and I don't know if it's because they haven't called, but once in a while you get through. But it's without the help of those researchers, I don't know if I'd be able to write what I'm writing now because the censorship is really bad. So I rely on them. They most of the time, so they send me all this stuff, and I still search myself, but I don't get anywhere. So I just rely on whatever they send me for the most part. And but it's I'm up to 230 some pages on Hidden History 3, and so I don't know. My books are usually 400 some pages, so it's more than halfway there, and it's I don't know what the deadline will be, but a lot of it, my publishers told me that the paperback version of Crimes and Cover-Ups is coming out next month, and that's the one that has a foreword by Ron Paul. So basically, the last I heard from him is that, well, we'll see how that does. So I've been trying to tell people, if you want to support me, buy the paperback of that, because apparently they're basing whether they're going to publish Hidden History 3 on how that one does. So we'll see. Hopefully it does well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's amazing you have those people on your side, fans, super fans, call them what you will, because I know the research I've been doing for years, while I love it, it's extremely time consuming when you're trying to do so many projects, so many different day jobs, so many other things on top of it as well. But it's just, it's one of these rabbit holes. You could stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning. I've often complained that I've enough time to sleep when I'm dead, but while I'm alive, I just need to keep chugging away to get more and more information out there. And if there was an 8 day in the week, I'd be doing a kind of a scenario, and I know you'd be the same that way. But in the time we've left, there's 2 areas I'd like to go down. I know we can probably only go briefly down them. Is the Clinton body bag count. Can you, because I looked into so much stuff on that, I've read so many blogs, so many books in different areas on it, and there's a lot of stories that don't match up. So it's not that I have loads of questions on it. I'm just basically getting your perspective on it from the background and research you've got from it. Can you basically separate the kind of conspiracy theory from the conspiracy itself that you found?
Well, the Clinton body count is very real. And I mean, most of these guys have body counts. And that's one of the things that speaks to Donald Trump's favor, is that I couldn't find a body count for him. And in that regard, he's the first president since Jimmy Carter that I really couldn't find a body count for. All the rest have body counts. Kennedy didn't, but LBJ had a huge body count. And writing Crimes and Cover-Ups, you go back to, FDR had a body count. Truman had a body count. So, most of them do. But Clinton's they're number one. They're like the Beatles of body counts. They're number one. Nobody can approach them, and you're still it's still ongoing. I mean, you'll still read about somebody who was connected to Hillary, and these people die in incredible ways. Way too many plane crashes. Way too many accidental falls off of high buildings. Suicides, things like that. Yeah, exactly. People don't die like that in real life. And it becomes okay. You could say a small minority of them could just be that happened. They were connected, but when you have things like Jerry Parks, who was the head of Bill Clinton's Secret Service detail when he was governor of Arkansas, security detail, he's watching Vince Foster. He's watching reports of that, and he tells his family, "I'm a dead man." He tells them that. And sure enough, in short order, he's out driving on a road, and some car comes by and shoots into the car and kills him. Now, how many people die outside of the world of organized crime? Who dies like that? And these people are basically mobsters, and that's why things like that happen. And there's lots of examples like that. I got to know Linda Hayden Ives, who was the mother of Kevin Ives, one of the boys on the tracks. If you've heard of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they went out one night probably to get high, teenagers, and on a warm summer night, and their bodies were found on dead on the train tracks. And I think the evidence shows that they happened upon an airlift of drugs that were coming into Mena, Arkansas, which a lot of that was running through. And there's a lot of deaths associated with that, including Barry Seal himself. They made a movie with Tom Cruise about that really didn't go into the most sordid parts. But tons of deaths just associated with that. But his mother never stopped fighting. She was a wonderful, remarkable woman. I quoted her at length in Hidden History. I never got her because she had health problems. I never got her to get on my radio show. I wanted her so bad. And unfortunately, she died earlier this year. And then shortly after she died, I just found out her daughter died. And I'm still trying to find out what she died from. So and she wasn't old. And the body counts just pile up on these people. And you see, like she told me in the email, because they were just an average family. They weren't political at all. They didn't hate Bill Clinton. They weren't most people in America are apathetic politically. Maybe not since Trump, because Trump's so divisive, everybody loves or hates him. But before Trump, most Americans were apathetic. A majority of them don't vote. They don't care. They realize on a visceral level that it doesn't really matter. It probably doesn't. But these people were accused of the left. They just dismissed them all. Oh, you're Republicans, or Jerry Falwell's behind you, or you hate the Democrats. No, she said, I didn't. Same thing with Linda Tripp. I talked to Linda Tripp, who also died, unfortunately, earlier this year. Very nice woman whose life was destroyed by Saturday Night Live and all this media just making fun of her, having John Goodman play her and ridicule her looks. And she said, she told me, how do you think my kids felt? Seeing their mother portrayed by John Goodman and ridiculed on Saturday Night Live. And what was her crime? Her crime was warning Monica Lewinsky because she said she worked. And again, she said, I'm a bureaucrat. I was a Democrat. I didn't hate Clinton, but the girls around the office, that's what we talked about, the body count. Everybody in there knew about it. They already knew that people were being killed that was associated with it. They knew Vince Foster, for instance. They knew that. And so Monica Lewinsky was a young girl. They weren't best friends. Like she said, she was my daughter's age. The media tried to make it seem like she portrayed her best friend. She was young enough to be her daughter. But she just said, I felt protective of her. And I just wanted to warn her that look at what happened to all these other people. You don't want it happening to you. So she tape recorded the conversations with her to protect herself. She said, I didn't want to be a victim of the body count. And the media ridiculed, acted like she was this horrible person. And that's when you talk to people like that, you realize that real people are involved in this. Now she was a lucky one, because they didn't kill her, but so many others they did. Same thing with Linda Ives, but Linda Ives' lives, again, family didn't support her. The other family didn't support her. She said, she got flack from the parents of the other kid. They didn't like her, and that's what you find is you wonder why more people don't talk is because when you do, most people want to believe what the authorities are telling them, even about their loved ones. So you have something like the family of Seth Rich, or a couple years ago. Obviously, it was almost certainly Julian Assange did everything but name him as the leaker of the DNC emails that showed how the party screwed Bernie Sanders over. Didn't show anything about Russia, but they exposed Hillary Clinton's corruption. And he was murdered in D.C. Murder never solved, never really investigated. And his parents will sue anybody that tries to delve into it. Now, I don't know what that says, but I know if it was my kid, I would want to know. But it gets back to what Steve was talking about, the Kennedy family. A lot of these cases, I don't know what motivates the family. What kind of threats did they make? Well, I don't think they could threaten me enough to do that. The Gary Webb's family, yeah, he shot himself twice in the head. You believe that? Really? Tell me how you can shoot yourself twice in the head. His family believes that. If you're accepting the official story, you accept that Seth Rich's family believes he was shot and killed in a botched robbery where nothing was stolen. So, what there was nobody around to stop the robbery because they didn't. So wasn't he robbed? So, but they don't ask these questions. And the Kennedy family is kind of an extension of that, where you should want to know what happened, right? I mean, more people should be like Martin Luther King's family, but most of them haven't been. And so I think a body counts are more successful because so few people question them. And I think despite the fact they smear people like us as conspiracy theorists, they know in their hearts, they know that it could be dangerous to talk about this. Well, it's only dangerous to talk about this if there's a shadowy force that's going to kill you for doing it, right? So, so I don't, I'm not afraid. I don't shy at all about the body counts. They're real. Yeah, some of them, sure, okay, maybe some of them can be explained away, but the sheer number of the Clinton body count defies all odds. I mean, there's no question something going on there that's organized.
Have you ever got any threat threatened yourself, or have you been pretty much plain sailing all the way through? Besides some of the obvious trolls and the harmless stuff like that, but anything more serious?
No, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I haven't really. It's kind of amazing, really. I mean, I kind of expected to have gotten threatened by now, but I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm so open. I don't hold anything back. I don't know, but I have not, but I do. There's a part of me that fears that, certainly, because I know what they've done to other people. But yeah, I can't. I said, or when I started my first nonfiction book, Hidden Mysteries, published, I said, if they're going to kill me, they're going to kill you for something you write, and it just shows how much we've lost. And somebody has to speak out, and more of us has to speak out. And they've killed lots of other people, so I don't think they'd hesitate to do that. But I don't think you can live in fear of that. And so I don't. And I have maybe if I started getting really credible death threats. So I've had people on my blog. A lot of attention gets directed to my blog where they'll tell me they're going to report me to this authority. It's stupid stuff. But nobody has said like watch your step or anything like that. Thank goodness. I don't I don't want any threats. So maybe I've just been lucky.
Yeah, of course, and that's what they want you to do. Obviously, is live in fear. But for the few minutes or so we've left, I want to touch briefly, if we can, on the music industry itself. What's your thoughts on the 27 Club? I'm itching more so to know about if you've covered the likes of Kurt Cobain. I don't believe it was suicide or he killed himself. A lot of people say it could have been Courtney. There could have been other people involved. I know she had, got the likes of hitmen involved that she'd get $50,000 to, or I suppose at the time, but obviously that didn't materialize. There's a lot of and ahs, should we say, about the whole scenario. Have you deep dived into the 27 Club itself, or the whole Kurt Cobain surrounding that?
Well, I don't know if there's a 27 Club. There's certainly you're talking about Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain, people like that. But I do cover, in my showbiz book, which is last I heard, it has a November 1st publication date, but it's called On Borrowed Fame: Money, Mystery, and Corruption in the Entertainment World. So I go into a lot of those things. I certainly cover Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood. I had Lana Wood, her sister, on my show a couple years ago talking. She certainly thinks she was murdered. There was more to it. John Belushi, John Lennon, certainly. And I do touch on Kurt Cobain, and you're right, Courtney Love was suspect. You had a guy that can't remember the guy's name that said that Courtney Love wanted to hire him, and he ended up dying, I believe, as well. So
he ended up actually admitting at one stage that, he said Courtney Love actually wanted to pay me off, and it was $50,000, I believe, at the time, but he didn't make it, or there was something going on, and then she obviously went elsewhere after that. But what's the conclusion on that? A lot of people are itching to know, because
it certainly it certainly looks like, and the funny thing about the entertainment industry, whether it's Hollywood or the music industry, is that it shares a lot of. It's the only other industry that's comparable to politics, because you see the same kind of corruption and unnatural deaths there. So there's no other industry, like real estate, the industry as I was in, or IT, another industry. You don't see a bunch of unnatural deaths in those industries. But in the music, certainly the music industry, Hollywood, and politics, you see. So when somebody like Kurt Cobain dies like that, conspiracy theories immediately arise, because if you look into, there's always some facts that don't add up. In that case, you have Courtney Love, kind of shady herself, and you have the witness that said she wanted me to kill him, and then he dies. I forget exactly how he died, but it was unnatural. I know that. And so, it's the conclusion is inescapable, especially when it's not like he was the first one to die that way. You had Bobby Fuller, the Bobby Fuller 4 had a big hit with I Fought the Law and the Law Won back in 1966, whose body was found in his burned out car, and gasoline had been poured down his throat. And they claimed he killed himself. It's like, it's ridiculous. And things like, Graham Nash, who was seemingly a peace and love kind of guy, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He had an ex-girlfriend that was found stabbed like 50 times in a yard or something. I mean, even people connected to these people, they die in strange ways. They fall off buildings, and it's the same kind of thing that happens in the world of politics. So I call it kind of an entertainment world body count. I think it's the same thing, and I don't know why. I don't know why Kurt Cobain or any of these people would necessarily be killed. But I know, and certainly we can never discount in entertainment, there is a lot of drug use. So yeah, it's possible Jimi Hendrix, was using too many drugs and he did choke on his own mom or whatever. That's possible. But the sheer number of them, I think, ought to give you pause for thought. So, question, I can't give you a definitive answer for that, but I would suspect that there's more to Kurt Cobain's death than what the official narrative says.
For sure. And you mentioned you touched on there actually Marilyn Monroe. There's a lot of connections between the two Kennedys. What's your thoughts on that? Was she with both? Was she just with one?
Well, I don't know. And again, it's part of the. I go into a lot of the attacks on the Kennedys, and I don't know where myth ends and reality begins in terms of the Kennedys. Because if you believe that John F. Kennedy, especially, was sleeping with all the women they claimed he was, well, at the same time they claimed he was so sick that he shouldn't have been president. His Addison's disease was so bad they were barely keeping him alive. I mean, they say that at the same time. It's a wonder that he could be this nonstop sex machine at the same time. I mean, they don't seem to go together. So I think a lot of it's been exaggerated. There seems to be something there with Marilyn Monroe. But again, I don't have a problem with that the way I would with Bill Clinton. There's a big difference between the governor of a state harassing a secretary like Paula Jones or a White House intern like Monica Lewinsky, where there's a big power imbalance, than it is for the president of the United States to be with the biggest movie star in the world. They're on the same level. And, it's kind of, I don't know how many of us could have resisted Marilyn Monroe back in the day. So I'm not going to, condemn him for that if it's even true, because they've told so many lies about Kennedy that it's hard to tell where any of it's true. So I'm suspicious of anything to say about him because they lie about the Kennedys repeatedly. But Marilyn Monroe was definitely, and I have a long section on it, there's no question she was murdered. She did not kill herself. But what happens is a lot of people that believe that she was murdered, then they blame the Kennedys. They think Bobby Kennedy visited there that day and that he killed her, shut her up. I don't think, I personally, knowing how many Kennedys they've killed, I don't think they killed it. I personally think that Marilyn Monroe was killed. And again, I have no evidence for it. It's just my hunch that she was killed as a warning. Basically to say, look, we can kill, your girlfriend or whatever she was, the most powerful movie star in the world. And we're going to do it. So, what we can do to you. That's what I suspect. I don't know for sure, but I don't think the Kennedys, much as I think, Chappaquiddick, I don't think Ted Kennedy was responsible for her death. I don't think he was in the car that day, because whatever is about the Kennedys, they may be notorious womanizers, but there's no evidence anywhere that they had any kind of a violent streak or they would possibly be capable of murder or something like that. Their vice seemed to be womanizing, that they did do that, but I don't think that he, in Ted Kennedy's case, his story was impossible. There's no way he told the truth about that, but I think he was forced to. I think it was his political assassination. I don't think he was in the car. And I don't think the Kennedys did anything to Marilyn Monroe, but I think unquestionably someone did. And, the actress that bought, I think her name was Veronica Hamill. She later was in Hill Street Blues. Her and her husband bought the house that Marilyn Monroe died in. And there was a little noticed article that talked about all the bugging equipment they found in the walls of her home later, where the FBI or somebody had put in there. So Marilyn Monroe's house, they were bugging the hell out of her. And, I don't think it was, the mafia doing it. I think there was the FBI or somebody more sophisticated than that. I think they were doing it for a reason. And I think that doesn't, play into anything that the Kennedys did. And again, I think the same people that probably end up killing the Kennedys off her as well.
And it's interesting, I believe it was only about a year or so, 12 months before, JFK died. There's only about 12 months, give or take, between the two of them. So be it a warning or not a warning, I don't think he took too much notice of it overall. But Don, it's been a pleasure. I know we're just about out of time. Amazing work you've been doing over the years. Keep going at it. Don't ever stop. I know you won't. You don't need me to tell you that. But I just give it back to Grace just to round us out. And thanks for your time today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Don. And I just want to make a shout out to our favorite guy also, John Barbour. Thank you, John. I know you're going to check this out. So thank you for introducing us to Don. And we'll have Don back again in the near future. and thank you for everything that you do. Any more last words, Don, about your recent book or the future upcoming book? Please share.
No, just, on borrowed fame, Money Misuse and Corruption in the Entertainment World is supposed to be out November 1st. So anybody that's interested in a kind of a conspiratorial, look at Hollywood and the entertainment world, I use my usual take on things there, where I look at things differently, but I think people will find it interesting.
And to all our viewers, if anything resonates to you, please share it. One of the viewers, Don, said, and maybe in the future, please look into Robert David Steele's. What happened to him?
Oh yes, I had a little bit of a connection with him. Yeah, I hear. I'm still trying to. I don't think he died of COVID. Let's put it that way. But it's very convenient to say. But yeah, it was,
Well, they'll add it to the
strange.
death count, though.
Yes, they'll put it in the number undoubtedly. Yes, for sure.
So thank you all. And if we do have a chance, maybe we'll do our reflections. But if not, please, we will see you again next week. And do take care of yourselves. Take care of your health, number one, so you can continue to do what you're doing for truth and freedom. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Don.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Don.
for having me. Take care. Okay.